Hey there, welcome to another video on the ToborTech YouTube channel. Today's Java Basics video is about multi-dimensional arrays in Java programming. So without further ado, let's get started. So far, all of the arrays that we have looked at have all stored simple values. We have arrays of strings, arrays of ints, arrays of doubles, and so on. But when you think about it, arrays are just lists of data, and we can also think about arrays as data. So that means we can store arrays inside of arrays, and these are called multi-dimensional arrays, since we have multiple dimensions, multiple layers of arrays inside of arrays. Multi-dimensional arrays are arrays of arrays, and they can be very useful when we want to store data in table-like formats, which is very common in things like data science and machine learning, as well as many other applications. To make a multi-dimensional array in Java, the biggest difference from making a one-dimensional array is in the declaration. Specifically, when we're making a 1D array, which is the arrays that we have been making previously, we put the data type and then one pair of square brackets, followed by the variable name and a semicolon. Now that we're making a two-dimensional array, as an example, we put two pairs of square brackets. If we're making a 3D array, we put three pairs of square brackets, and so on. So let me just copy this code into our online Java editor and run this program. And we see nothing printed out because we have told Java nothing to print out, and there are no errors thrown. To initialize, which is to give this array some values, we can simply put inner arrays inside of the outer array. So here we have the initialization of the array nums. We can see what I have highlighted here is the entire outer array nums. Inside of this outer array, we have three smaller arrays, each storing two values. So we have 1, 2, and 3 inner arrays, each storing two ints. 1 int, 2 int, 1 int, 2 int, and also 2 ints right here. So when we're declaring this array, we want to put int right here because the smallest value here, these are all ints. And this is the entire outer array, and these are the smaller inner arrays. You can also think about this array as a table with 3 rows and 2 columns. Each inner array are the rows. The 3 inner arrays are the 3 rows. And then we also have 2 columns because we have 2 values inside of each row. So let me just copy this code into our online Java editor. And again, nothing got printed out and no errors were thrown. Now let's talk about indexing multi-dimensional arrays. While initially, working with multi-dimensional arrays may appear more complicated than one-dimensional arrays, everything you've learned about 1D arrays still holds true when dealing with arrays of arrays. So when we're accessing one value from a 2D array, we first specify the inner row, the inner array, and then the index of the value in that array. So let's take the number 3 from nums as an example. So we have the nums array here. We want to access the number 3. So what we can do is we first find the inner array, what is right here. And inside of the bigger array, this has the index of 1. This is the second array inside of the bigger array. So this has index of 1. Inside of this array, 3 has an index of 0. So what we're going to do when we access the number 3 is we can write nums, and then in square brackets, we put 1. This will give us the second row of our array. And then we put in square brackets 0 after this. So out of the smaller array, we're picking the first value from the row, which will give us 3. So let me just copy this code and print it out. So we should see 3 printed out. And there you have it. And just as an exercise, What will happen if I put nums2, 1? Before I run this, take a moment to think about this. What will be printed out when I run this program? If you said 6, that is entirely correct because we're selecting, first of all, using the 2 here, we're selecting the last row of our array. And in that last row, the element with index 1 is the 6 right here. So if I run this program, we get 6, as you can see right here. And modifying elements is the exact same idea. So we can write nums10 0 is equal to 5 or maybe 10 or something like that. So let's just take a look at how we can do that. So if I just write nums, let's just use this example. So let's just change 6 to something else. So 2, 1, let's change it to maybe 10. And if I run this program, we'll see 10 printed out instead of 6 now. Good. So now let's talk about looping through multidimensional arrays. To loop through an array, we use loops. Now to loop through a multidimensional array, we have to use nested loops, which are loops inside of loops. So with a for loop, this is a nested for loop. Let's take a look at the syntax right here. So we have an outer loop, this line followed by this line. And then we have an inner loop right here. This is the inner loop. And inside of the inner loop, we have a print statement. What will happen when we run this loop is that our outer loop will run several times. Each time the outer loop runs, the inner loop will run, well, let's take a look. So nums row.length, that will give us the length of each row, which is 2. So this loop will run twice for every time this loop runs once. And because this loop will run 3 times, this statement will run 3 times 2, so it will run 6 times. Each time, row and column will be different values, so nums row col will give us each element of the array nums. So the outer loop is responsible for changing the row number. We'll first take a look at all the numbers in row 0, and then we'll increment it to look at row 1, and then row 2. Every time we go through a row, in the inner loop, we're going through all the values of that row. So we have first of all the 0th column, and then the 1, the first column, and we print out the values at those indices. So let me just copy this code and run this right here. This may be easier to see if I format this correctly and run this. And we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the first time the outer loop runs, we will be looking at the row will be 0. The row will be 0 the first time the outer loop runs. So we're looking at this inner array. And then the inner loop will run. The first time the inner loop runs, col will be equal to 0. And then it will increment so that col is equal to 1. So in that one time the outer loop runs, we print out 1 and 2. The second time the outer loop runs, the print statement will print out 3 and 4. And then when row is equal to 2, we print out 5 and 6. So that's how we print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we can also use a for each loop to do pretty much the same thing. So here we have, again, a nested for each loop. The outer loop is responsible for going through the rows of our multidimensional array. Notice how we write int square brackets row and then nums. So for each row in nums, we will do something. And that something is for each num in that row, we'll print out the num. So let's take a look at what will happen if I run this code. I believe that is the correct indentation. And let's take a look at the output. And we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So these are 2 ways of how you can loop through a multidimensional array in Java. You have to use a nested for loop or a nested while loop, I suppose, but usually for loops are cleaner and easier to use. So let's practice the basics of using two-dimensional arrays, since that's the easiest multi-dimensional array to practice with. So make such an array, put in some data, change some of its values, and then loop through the array to print out what is inside. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then when you're done, come back to this video and I'll show you a sample solution. So here is what I have written right here. So we have the array initialization right here. So we're making a two-dimensional string array called words. It is a 2D array. It has 2 rows. This is the first row. This is the second row. In each row, we have 2 elements. We have Java and then basics and then programming and then programmer. And this line is going to change one of these elements to grade. Take a moment to think about which element are we changing. And if you said basics, that is correct because we're specifying the 0th row. So that is specifying this thing. Word 0 is this thing. Word 01 will be picking out the basics right here and changing that to grade. And then we used a nested for each loop. So for each string array row in the words outer bigger 2D array, for each string word in that row, we'll print out the word. So let's just copy this code and see what happens if I run this program. And let me just indent this correctly, as well as this. And actually, I think it might be a good idea if I just use print line instead of print right here, since we have strings anyways. And we don't want them to be at on the same line. So, right, we need a semicolon here. I forgot to put a semicolon right here. Now, if we run this program, it should work properly. It'll print out Java, grade, programming, programmer. So we changed basics to grade. Although the examples shown above were all of 2D arrays, arrays can store as many layers of nested arrays as is necessary, although 2D arrays are pretty common and pretty powerful just with 2 dimensions. And this allows programmers to do many powerful and useful data storage and manipulation. And that's it for this video about multi-dimensional arrays in Java programming. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to our channel down below. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, and we hope to see you in future videos.